Howdy, it's Matt, and in this part of the series on the inexpensive flight controllers using iNav, we are going to be taking a quick look at the iNav configurator. Now, chances are you've not been and received your flight controller board and GPS module just yet, so this is like a precursor episode for when you do get them, and things won't feel as alien, if that makes sense. So with that said, I assume that you've already got iNav installed. We covered that in a previous episode, and I've opened up Chrome and we can see that we've got iNav there as an app. You may need to click on the apps tab on the top left hand corner, or just type in your web browser in your Chrome web browser, chrome://apps. Anyway, click onto iNav, it will open up in a new window. Now, I do have a little bit of bad news for you, which is basically iNav won't let you in unless you have a board connected. And what I actually have here right next to me is the Skywalker Falcon is sat next to me at the moment. So that's why I'm able to get in. So don't panic if you try opening up iNav and it won't let you connect to anything, because you don't actually have anything to connect to, if that makes sense. So before we dive in, I'm just going to give you a quick walk around the interface. Now, I am assuming that you've probably never used CleanFlight, BaseFlight, or even Betaflight before. So this kind of interface is a little bit strange for you. So with that said, this is meant as a mat-proof guide, so I'm assuming nothing. So with that said, in the top right hand corner up here, we've got COM1. So that's saying COM1 because I do have a board connected. You'll notice the port speed we've got there and a connect option. Okay. Now, it's also worth noting over COM ports is that you could connect a Bluetooth device to your flight controller and then connect to it via Bluetooth to your computer, which would be a lot easier than me trying to run a cable across my desk to plug in the board. So I can show you this. And it also means that you could perhaps use the EZ GUI app on the flight line and your mobile phone in Bluetooth and change any settings there remotely off your mobile phone or your tablet, for example. So really, really cool. Anyway, we'll get back to that in a moment. Down the left-hand corner, down on the left-hand side, we've got some section here for documentation, which, to be honest, you only really need to know about the iNav wiki. And the other section is the firmware flasher. Now, that is a episode in itself, and we've covered that separately. So let's come back to the welcome section. Now, I'm going to go and connect to my board. I'm able to do that because I've got a flight controller which is connected up via a micro USB connector sat here right next to me, and as we can see, it's not particularly level. Let me just go and level it out. That's not really level, is it? Try and level it out. There you go. That's right. But I'm here moving them. In fact, why don't I show you? Look, I'm here moving the model around. So nose is going down, back's going down, getting the orientation. Let me move this around so you can see the front going down. There you go. So the front's going down, the right's going down, the left's going down, and the back, things like that. And it's also moving around. So that's what that funny big block looks like. Okay, and by the way, the first time you open up iNav, chances are you're going to see a quadcopter there. Don't panic, we will change iNav to be a flying wing instead. Or of course you could choose as normal fixed wing model. Anyway, let's get ourselves acquainted with the interface. Now at the top we can see that there's some things going on here. You will see that it's actually connected at the moment because I do actually have my transmitter enabled over there. We can see the gyro has been enabled, the accelerometer, two key sensors which are enabled by default. We also got GPS enabled. Now, I will cover the setup of GPS in a later episode. Just be aware that we've got certain things enabled along the top and we can disconnect if we want to. Then down the left-hand side of the screen, we've got to see they've got lots and lots of tabs. Don't panic, we only need a couple of these. And then in the middle is like the bulk of the settings which we can see. Now I'll cover the calibration later, don't worry about that for right now, but just be aware that's the main section. So we're in the setup tab. Let's go down to presets. Now iNav does come with a collection of presets sets. Personally, I've been using the 600mm flying wing, which has worked fine in a wing twice the size of it. That has worked very, very well. The topic of ports. Now with these flight controller boards, and I'm using the same board as what I've suggested to you, is that they have several different UARTs, or output ports is probably the easiest way of explaining it. The only thing which you can screw up, and I mean it, the only thing which you can screw up is that if you muck around with this first line, so where it says USB VCP, don't touch the first row, okay? Because if you do touch the first row, you've either got to connect up Bluetooth to it and then undo your mess, or just reflash the firmware on it. Neither are desirable, so stay away from line 1. You'll see that we've set up UART 1 as being serial RX, in other words to use S-Bus as an import, as its input mechanism. So from the transmitter, we're using S-Bus through the receiver into the flight controller. Then down for UART 6, we've got the GPS enabled on a baud rate of 115200, which will work fine for you out of the box as well. So that's the ports tab. Configuration, this is where things are going to make a little bit more sense to you. You'll see that we've been and selected a flying wing, and I don't know if you remember back in part 1, and I joked that you really couldn't go wrong. There's a picture of a flying wing, so it says 1 and 2, well that's PWM outputs, or the button, the first ports on the board itself. So ports 1 and 2 are for motors to thrust forwards. Then servo output number 3 is the left aileron, or elevon, looking at the back of the model. And then servo output 4 is the right aileron. Really kind of simple, yeah? Right, let me just go and change this to aeroplane so you can see what it would look like. So channels 1 and 2 are for motors. So if you've only got one motor, that would be channel 1. Maybe you've got an XUAV Clouds, for example, twin motors on the front. Then motor 1 would be the left-hand wing, and then motor 2 would be the right-hand wing. And then channels 4 and 5 are the left and the right ailerons. Channels 3 is the elevator, and channel 6 is the rudder. Really straightforward, isn't it? Nice little pretty picture. So let me go and change that back to flying wing, because that's what that one's set up for. My transmitter is going to complain at me because I've not played with her in a few seconds. Anyway, moving on down. We've got some sensors, board alignment, just in case you can't fit your board in the right way round. You can tell iNav that the board's been like twisted 180 degrees. I would strongly suggest you that you keep away from that one because it's kind of a bit weird. The only one which you may need to change later on is to flip the magnometer by 180 degrees, and the reason for that is that the magnometer, which is on that GPS unit, is actually mounted on the bottom, so it needs to get flipped 180, but don't worry about that. I'll put that in an appendix for you. You'll see that the receiver mode has been set up for serial based receiver, so S-Bus, and I've chosen S-Bus further down. We've got GPS enabled with U-blocks. One thing which I haven't set on mine, because you don't need to, because iNav already automatically works this out for you, is the declination, which is basically how many degrees of movement has gone on. It's a bit weird. Basically, you don't need to set it because iNav does it for you. Brilliant. Then on the right hand side, I've got a couple of things enabled in here. The motors and servo output. Don't spin the motors when armed, and disarmed regardless of throttle value as well. I did set my minimum and maximum points in there. Scrolling down, I've got battery voltage enabled, and that will need some slight configuration by changing the scale value in here with a multimeter, but don't worry, I'll stick that in a later date. Current sensor, this board does not support a current sensor. It does have a analog to digital converter, which you could potentially use, but it doesn't have a built-in current sensor. You'll see that I've got analog RSSI input, something which I need to solder onto the bottom of the board. Black box is enabled, and also OSD is enabled as well. Really, really cool. And by the way, I hope all of this is making sense so far. Failsafe. Apologies, my voice went a bit then. Failsafe. You'll see that I've got Failsafe set to return to home. Now the default of iNav in version 1.7, and you can tell the version in the top left hand corner, is that the version it's going to return to home and then it's going to land, which is typically not what you want for a fixed wing model. Remember that there are some advanced settings, and I'll show you where you can change those in a few moments time. I'm going to skip over PID tuning and advanced tuning because I've just not used those sections, and I would strongly suggest that you keep away from those sections until you're more comfortable with iNav. Moving on, the receiver. So I've got my Tyrannus just sat here, so I've got mine set up actually, that's low rates. So you'll see that I'm moving the roll stick left and right, so that's right, that's left. Pitch, pulling back on the stick, it's going down, pushing forwards, it's going up. Roll, and the throttle's working as well, and I've got a couple of switches working. So yeah, don't worry about setting up that right now. For all intents and purposes, you just need to see those bars working. Modes. Now, the modes tab is a very important section because I don't know if you saw a few moments ago, I was clicking a few.
Horizon off.
Horizon.
Race mode.
Race mode actually means pass-through mode on my transmitter. Is that using a couple of switches, you can configure all the different modes to whatever suits you. So what I've got set on mine is the back left-hand switch on the Tyrannus. That one's set as my ARM switch. Now, iNav will not ARM, and the reason for that is because we don't have a GPS fix. We can see that we've got a blue icon at the top, but if we go back to the first tab, we'll see on the right-hand side, navigation is safe and it's cross, and the reason for that, it's not safe because we don't have a GPS fix, mainly because my office is like a nuclear bunker. Anyway, different flight modes. Arm, angle, and by the way, the default is rate, by the way. You've got horizon. Now, arm will allow you to arm the board so you can then go on and fly it. Horizon is a mode which gives you stabilization, keeps your model level, but it will also let you do funky stuff, so you can do rolls and loops and stuff like that, and it will only kick in when you need it to, aka when you let go of the sticks. We've got heading hold and nav alt hold, which are two settings I was recently playing with. We've got nav return to home, which is your return to home option, and then you've got pass through. Now, pass through is the most important mode which you need to know of besides ARM, and the reason for that is that when you go out for your test flight with iNav, is that you're going to be launching in pass through mode, aka you have full control of the model without any interaction from the flight controller itself. And the reason for that is that you need to get that model trimmed in and make sure it's flying correctly before you move to a stabilized mode such as horizon or acro or something like that. Because if your surfaces are reversed by accident, then the model's going to spin or do something really, really odd. So you always launch to begin with pass-through mode. Now, I'll put a link to all the different iNav modes in the video description for you. Do go across to the wiki and get familiar to the different options, because there's one down there called Nav Launch, which will help you launch models as well. Something which I have yet to play with myself. Maybe I'll add an episode later as part of this series on the Nav Launch option. Adjustments haven't been in there, to be honest. The one thing which you might need to change is that I don't know if you can see that one there. So that's servo 3. So servo 3, which one was that? Can't remember. Go to the configuration tab, which was the left wing, looking from behind the model, was actually moving the wrong direction. So what I needed to do was come in here, and because the surface was moving the wrong way, I dropped that down, and it was originally 100%, and I've moved that all the way down to minus 100%, and then underneath my head in the corner there's a save button, and I press save, so that sorted that out. Then we've got the GPS tab, which doesn't look particularly exciting, but it does look particularly exciting for one key reason, is that here on the left hand side where it says total messages, it's counting up the messages. That means that the GPS is working. If I took this model outside where it was able to get a GPS fix and it wasn't in this nuclear bunker, then it would pick up a GPS fix, and once you've got a 3D fix, then you would then be able to fly. Motors is a special tab where you can calibrate your ESC, topic which I'll be keeping away from, to be brutally honest. The OSD tab, now this is really cool. This is where you can turn stuff on and off for your OSD, and where you can move things around on your screen. So if we have a look up here on the top, we will see that I'm just hovering my mouse on that value there on the screen, and you'll see on the left hand side it's highlighting RSS value. So if you wanted the RSS value down at the bottom, you can have it down. Now I've just clicked and then dragged and dropped it, but but actually I want mine at the top. You can choose between the different video formats, what units to use, whether imperial or metric. You've got alarms based upon values. If you want an artificial horizon on your screen or not. Yeah, really, really cool. Any of those things which you see down the left-hand side, you can enable or disable. So maybe that's too much information for you on the on-screen display. Well, that's fine. Maybe you don't want those horizontal sidebars. You can turn them off. And instead, we've then just got the speed and then the altitude on the right-hand side. Really straightforward. So once you've been and made your changes, underneath my head, down there in the bottom right hand corner, there's a save button, and I press save. Now, to be honest, the only thing which you can screw up with the OSD is this one thing. Down in the bottom right hand corner, there's a button called Font Manager, which you won't see because my head's sat on top of it. You click on that, and the only thing which you can screw up on the OSD is to forget to press the upload font option and then press upload, which then uploads the fonts to the OSD. That's the only thing which you can screw up on the OSD, except for one thing, which was my mistake. I don't know if you can see that on there, distance to home. Okay, and then we have direction to home. You need to put direction to home and distance to home on separate lines, because if you put them too close together, what I had on the maiden flight is that every time you went over 1,000 feet distance away, is that it then hit the arrow, so I didn't actually really know the way home according to the OSD. Of course, I recognised the ground, so I knew where I was. But point aside is that do go careful of those two. Make sure that they are on separate lines so that you always get your arrow showing. The next tab down the left-hand side is the LED strip, which is not going to put it on a flying wing. You've got a sensors tab, so you can make sure your sensors are working. So I'm just rattling the model around, and you can see the sensors are working. Black box is you can set up your iNav to do black box login. On some of these flight controllers, they do have an SD card slot underneath, which is great if you want to debug. To be honest, most of you probably won't want that option. And the last tab is the CLI tab. Now, this is probably one of the scariest tabs of them all, but to be honest, it's also one of the most powerful ones. And if you can manage copy and paste, you're going to get on fine with this tab. Now, I'm going to quickly just type in a quick command. I'm going to type in diff, okay? And what that does is show all the differences on my setup compared to the defaults, okay? So we can see that we've got feature RX serial enabled. Okay, we're using the mixer flying wing, and this is just a great way of me knowing what settings have I been in change compared to the defaults. There was one in here which I'm just quickly looking for. So that one there, nav FW bank angle. So that will allow us to bank up to 35 degrees. So when in a stabilized mode, it will make it feel a lot more responsive rather than just going round part way round. It will allow us up 35 degrees of movement. What we got on there, nav _ RTH altitude. So that's the return to home altitude. That's set to 70 meters. Our nav _ RTH allow _ landing is off. So in other words, when it comes home from a return to launch, it won't attempt to land. So if you saw the maiden of the Skywalker Falcon with iNav in it, it was trying to land every time it came home. Excuse me, and that's because that setting was on. So I've been and set it to off. So I've been out and flown it since, and of course when it returns home again, it just loiters, which is exactly what I wanted. And then there was another one in there as well, which I can't remember. But don't panic, I will give you a list of commands which you can literally just copy and paste in here. And of course, when you make a change, the thing which you must remember to do is type save at the bottom and then press return, and then that will save all the settings and reboot the flight controller. So there you go, that's been and again, click connect again in the top right hand corner. And that is the brief introduction to iNav and the iNav configurator. As we've just been in the scene, nothing is particularly scary in here. All you need to know about is a couple of copy and paste settings, and it's straightforward as that. I really do mean that. Now, I will go on and we will be setting up iNav with your flight controller board in a later episode, but for right now, I sincerely hope this episode's been and helped you. at least iNav and the iNav configurator shouldn't look scary anymore. We have a connect button in the top right hand corner, we have some tabs down the left hand side, and we've been through all the major tabs. There are a lot of settings in there, but the vast majority of them you don't even need to worry about. And again, this is why I'm trying to make this mat proof set of tutorials to help you get up and running with iNav, because of the success which I've had coming back and looking at it a good 6 months later has been frankly very successful. So on that note, from myself, Matt, I'm looking forward to seeing you in the next part. Cheerios!